Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the News and Politics Hour. We're talking a little politics and news. Just had Dee Dee Whitman, independent candidate for mayor of Providence, here in studio. And now we've got a familiar face, Nick Hemond, the president of the Providence School Board. Thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here, as always.
Well, I appreciate your coming in. We certainly have a big issue to talk about. It is what's facing the city right now, and it is the strike that took place after protracted negotiations between the Teamsters, the bus drivers, and First Student and the bus company. Now, the school board doesn't have a dog in the fight, but you are tasked with overseeing education within the city. I mean, how did we get to this point?
Well, our dog in the fight is our kids and the families that are affected by the strike. And these negotiations have been going on for the entire summer. Unfortunately, they've not been productive in terms of avoiding a strike. It's not the first time we've had to deal with it. Won't be the last time, unfortunately, that we have to deal with it. So our focus has been on preparing ourselves as best we can to deal with the 9,000 kids that no longer have a way to get to and from school, that rely on us to do that. And unfortunately, we have no viable alternative. There's no other company that can take on the amount of children that we need to transport. So we can't just go to the next available bus company to do that. And our focus has been on getting our resources and keeping all of our resources in the schools to make sure everybody's safe.
What have you been hearing today, Nick? We were out and about early this morning. Actually, we're on the scene when a student was hit riding a bike to school. What have you heard today from folks? Because, it's 3:30 now, schools are getting out. This would have been the time that buses were on the road, and now that's the Herculean task of getting all of these students back home, however they get home.
So I haven't at least been made aware of any sort of other injuries or safety-related issues. Been a lot of traffic. Principals were concerned about traffic around the buildings and the side streets. I've called to probably 5 or 6 schools just to get a sense of where we are in terms of attendance, because we're worried that so many kids won't be getting to school. Yeah. So attendance-wise, I think we're about 84% of the students are in school today.
Okay.
On our best day, we're like 92%, so you can see there's some difference there. Our average day, we're about 90%. So there's some movement on attendance. I don't know what it's been like in terms of tardies, but we're being very flexible with our policies in that regard. So we're excusing the first 3 absences that are related to travel, and we're being very flexible on lateness.
So we did see that, and we have reported it again, this grace period, if you will, the first few days. But what happens if this ends up being protracted, if this goes on for more than 3 days, more than a week?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a huge concern, and there's no really easy answers. We're going to have to come up with long-term plans. Right now, if there are kids that are not getting to school, particularly we have 1,000 children with special needs that rely on us and cannot get to school any other way. We're going to have to try to find services to get them to work into their homes. We are reimbursing them for travel expenses. Federal law says we have to make up whatever time they lose. But I'm hopeful. There may be a strike, but everyone's still working to try to resolve it, and I'm hopeful that they'll come to a resolution in short order. It's not good for anybody. Nobody's getting paid. Nobody's working. Nobody's can get to school. So I'm sure everybody will get through it eventually.
Well, we're keeping communications open here from a press standpoint with both First Student and the Teamsters. This is the end of day one. We'll see what happens moving forward. Let's talk to an issue that had arisen several weeks ago. Let's talk school safety. It was not a de facto school shooting. It just happened to be outside of schools at the close of school day. Talk with us a little bit about what you've discussed at the board level about safety measures. Terrible things can happen anytime, any place. This wasn't, again, in a school, but it did impact a young man, and the whole community mourns his loss.
Right. I mean, there's no greater tragedy than what we've been through, and just I can't even imagine what the Parsons family has had to deal with. But prior to that, we had already asked Sergeant Wheeler and the Commissioner of Public Safety to do a study of all of our buildings.
Okay.
And they, as a result of something that had happened at one of our other high schools last year. So we actually have already completed a comprehensive audit of our safety systems and our safety protocols in school. We have some recommendations that we're now assigning cost value to see what it would cost to do. More cameras, alarms on doors, ways for people to know that a certain door is open, so that not only does an alarm go up, but it tells you what door so you can respond quickly. One of the other things we're looking at for those 3 schools, Classical, Central, and PCTA, is potentially some private security, if we
Okay.
can make that work, because we want to do it in a way that it helps police, it doesn't hinder them, because you're having, almost 2,500 kids that are all going out into a neighborhood where you have a lot of interactions, and you only have 2 school resource officers over there. So we're looking at that as well. I support these efforts that you hear at the state level to increase funding for school resource officers. I think it's important from a safety perspective, but I also think it's important from a community policing perspective, where kids get to know officers in their schools, they get to know a friendly face, and they get to know that they have someone they can go to. So we had that in executive session a couple of weeks ago. It's going to be on our agenda on a continuing basis, and it will be budgeted into our next budget.
So as you mentioned, identifying after having had the study done where there's places that can have enhanced safety measures, but as you said, have a budgetary item attached to it. So we will see this on the agenda and at meetings with the school board moving forward.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's no greater priority than safety. I think we budgeted about $2 million this year prior to all this to do some security-related enhancements. We're going to put more of that on the table for our next budget as well.
So a couple of things that came up that you probably weren't anticipating. You knew the school safety measures, but the unfortunate incident, and then obviously the bus strike, which had been sort of looming, but then ended up happening. But let's talk a little bit aside that, the sort of from your perspective as school board president, sort of your top agenda items to accomplish this year.
So our top agenda item is our ELO situation. We had been working on that, obviously there's all this Department of Justice has come out recently, but we'd been working on that since 2012. 2012, we had commissioned the Council of Great City Schools to do a study, and we were implementing changes as a result of that. Some of those changes met state standards but didn't meet the federal standards, so we have to back up a little bit. But that's our number one issue. When I got on the board, we had 14% of our population in the schools English language learners. Today we have 32%, and it's not going to go down. And it's not going to go down, for those of you that aren't from Providence, anywhere. That's the future of education in this state, and that's what we need to do at the city level and the state level. That has to become a major priority, and we can't do it alone. We have to address it in the funding formula. The other thing is we have a $37 million deficit over the next several years. So the superintendent is working on a very sobering picture for folks as to what that's going to mean for athletics, after-school activities, community partnerships, if we don't change the way we're funding schools. So those are our top 2 issues. School security is one of them, and then the overall performance of our district as a whole. We have to make more progress. We have to make more progress quickly, but we have to address an overall funding mechanism, because when you do that with the ELO, you're going to see resources and you're going to see ability to raise test scores faster.
And we had discussed this before here in studio. GoLocal wrote the piece about this earlier this week. As the gubernatorial candidates look at school safety issues and school infrastructure issues, it is that performance. You see what's happening in the schools on a day-to-day basis. Where do you see, as you talk about ELL being sort of that major component of trying to enhance test scores, I mean, has the school system identified areas? Where do you think the other places are for the biggest gains? Because as we've seen this, again, these stagnant test scores, what are those discussions around, best practices to say, well, we just probably can't keep doing the same thing. Here's what we need to do to increase performance.
I think across the country we need a 12-month school calendar, because one of the things that we see in the data is kids get where they need to be in June, and then they're further behind when they come back in September. So we need to get to a 12-month school calendar everywhere in the United States. And I think there's some willingness on the side of the union to do that with us in sort of a pilot program capacity. I'm not talking about a 365-day school year. I'm talking about changing the way you break up 180 days. So I think a 12-month school calendar is really something that you would see dramatic improvement. I think it will take some getting used to, and it's certainly a system-wide reform. But to me, that's the most important thing we could do. And we try to do it with summer programs. And when I was a kid, I didn't want to do summer programs. I wanted to go to the beach. I wanted to go to the park. I wanted to play sports. So if you gave me the choice, I wouldn't have made the right choice. So if we change the way we do our school year, I think you'd see dramatic improvement.
Have you had conversations with folks about this at the board level, at the administration level? What's the reception been?
Yeah, I've talked about it with the mayor. I've talked about it with Mary Beth Calabro from the Teachers Union. I've always enjoyed a very collaborative relationship with her. Granted, a lot of these discussions have, you know, been distracted away from those things because of the situation with the contract. But I think it's something that we could work towards. I really do believe it's something we could work towards, whether it's in a pilot program that starts it and you see some results, and then you make the determination whether it's something you want to do across the whole system.
Well, an interesting approach as we are constantly looking at education here in the city and across the state and deliverables. And with your role as president of the school board, you have a unique perspective on the matter here. So anything else you want to share with folks about the school board as we have you here in studio? Again, seems all bus strike all the time, but there's certainly more.
Well, I do want to say a couple of things about the bus strike that I think people should know. Number one, if you go to our website, you'll see the information. There's a pop-up notice that'll come up with the latest information about the strike. If you have questions about it, you can email us at questions@ppsd.org. Also, for elementary parents out there, just a reminder that tomorrow is an early dismissal day for elementary school. So check with your local school, check with your child's school, and make sure that you remember that it's early dismissal tomorrow. And make sure your contact forms are updated, because in those schools, parents or an authorized person have to pick the children up right now. And make sure you bring your ID.
It's very important. They brought that up yesterday at the press conference in anticipation of the strike to make sure that those lines of communication are open and you have the correct ones. So Nick Hemond with the Providence School Board, the president, thank you for joining us today here in studio. It was a busy 3 o'clock hour talking tech, politics, and news. 4 o'clock with Chelsea Gay is going to be lifestyle. So we look forward to seeing you back here at 4 p.m. in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center.